The Carlisle Indian Industrial School loomed before them like a fortress of red brick and rigid discipline. Its imposing buildings stretching across the Pennsylvania landscape under a gray October sky. Hope pressed her face against the wagon window, watching uniformed children march in perfect formation across the courtyard, their faces solemn and their movements mechanical. At 3 years old, she couldn't understand the significance of what she was seeing, but she sensed the weight of it in her father's tense silence. Tom had spent the 3-week journey from Arizona preparing himself for what they would find at Carlisle, but the reality was more overwhelming than he had imagined. Hundreds of Native American children, some as young as Hope, others nearly adults, moved through the grounds with the precision of soldiers. Their traditional clothing had been replaced with military-style uniforms, their long hair cut short, their faces bearing expressions of resigned compliance. "Remember," Agent Whitman said as their wagon approached the main administration building, "the child will be housed in the dormitory with others her age. You'll be in the staff quarters, assuming your application is approved," his tone suggested. That Tom's proximity to Hope would be limited and carefully controlled. Captain Richard Henry Pratt, school's founder and superintendent, was waiting in his office when they arrived. He was a tall, stern man in his 50s, whose military bearing and unwavering belief in his mission made him both respected and feared. His office walls were covered with before and after photographs of students, dramatically showing the transformation from savage to civilized. "Mr. Harrison," Captain Pratt said, rising from behind his massive oak desk, "Agent Whitman has informed me of your unusual situation. I must say your request to work here while your ... ward ... receives her education is highly irregular." Tom had rehearsed this conversation during the long journey, knowing that everything depended on making the right impression. "Captain Pratt, I have 20 years of experience in carpentry and logging. Your school needs skilled tradesmen to teach practical skills. I can contribute to your mission while ensuring Hope's transition is as smooth as possible." Captain Pratt studied Tom with calculating eyes. "Our mission here, Mr. Harrison, is to kill the Indian and save the man. We believe that complete separation from previous associations is essential for these children to fully embrace civilized life. Your continued presence might complicate that process." Hope, who had been sitting quietly in Tom's lap during the adult conversation, chose that moment to speak up. "I'm thirsty," she said in her clear, innocent voice. Captain Pratt's expression softened slightly as he looked at the little girl. Despite his harsh philosophies, he was not immune to the appeal of a well-cared-for child. Hope was clean, healthy, and obviously loved, qualities that spoke well of Tom's character as a caretaker. "How old is she?" Captain Pratt asked. 3 years old, Tom replied. "She's bright, learns quickly, and she's already started reading simple words." This was true. During their mountain winters, Tom had taught Hope to recognize letters in simple words using the Bible and children's books that Mrs. Coleman had provided. Hope had shown a remarkable aptitude for learning, memorizing entire stories after hearing them just a few times. Captain Pratt made notes in a leather-bound journal. "Children her age typically spend their first year in our preparatory program, learning basic English and adjusting to structured routines. They live in dormitories supervised by staff members who ensure proper discipline and cultural adjustment." Tom felt his stomach clench at the thought of Hope sleeping in a dormitory surrounded by strangers, crying for him in the night with no one to comfort her. But he forced himself to remain calm and diplomatic. "Of course, Captain. I understand the importance of structure and education. I'm simply hoping that my presence on the staff might help Hope adjust more easily to her new environment." After a lengthy interview about Tom's skills and background, Captain Pratt made his decision. "I'm willing to offer you a position as an instructor in our industrial arts program. I'll teach carpentry and basic construction skills to our older boys. Your quarters will be in the staff dormitory, and you'll have limited, supervised contact with the child during designated visiting hours." It wasn't ideal, but it was more than Tom had dared hope for. At least he would be on the same grounds, able to see Hope regularly and monitor her well-being. "Thank you, Captain. I accept your offer." The next few hours were a blur of paperwork, medical examinations, and orientation procedures. Hope was taken to the girls' dormitory, where a stern-faced matron named Mrs. Fletcher would oversee her care. Tom was assigned to a small but clean room in the staff quarters and given a stack of regulations to study. That first night was the longest of Tom's life. He lay awake in his narrow bed, knowing that Hope was crying for him in a room full of strangers. He had always been there when she needed comfort, had always been the constant presence that made her feel safe and loved. Now, for the first time in her short life, she was alone. The next morning, Tom reported to the carpentry workshop where he would teach older students the skills they would need to find employment after graduation. The workshop was well equipped and organized with tools and materials that would have been the envy of many professional operations. But the students who trooped in for the first class bore little resemblance to the eager apprentices Tom might have expected. These were boys between the ages of 14 and 18. All Native American, all bearing the psychological scars of forced separation from their families and cultures. They moved with the mechanical precision that Tom had observed throughout the school. Their faces carefully blank, their responses to his questions limited to yes, sir, and no, sir. "My name is Mr. Harrison," Tom began, standing before the class of 20 boys. "I'm here to teach you carpentry and construction skills that will serve you well in whatever career you choose after graduation." One boy, taller than the others and with defiant eyes that hadn't been completely subdued by the school's discipline, raised his hand. "Mr. Harrison, sir, are you the man who brought the little Apache girl?" Tom was surprised by the question, and by the fact that news of Hope's arrival had already spread through the student population. "Yes, I am. Her name is Hope."
Ow.
"Is she really your daughter?" another boy asked, his voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity beneath the required formality. Tom looked around the room at these young men who had been torn from their own families and told to forget their past lives. He made a decision that would define his relationship with the students and potentially his future at the school. "Yes," he said simply, "she is my daughter in every way that matters. I love her, I care for her, and I will always be her father. No matter what anyone else says." The boys exchanged glances, and Tom saw something flicker in their eyes. Hope, perhaps, or recognition, or simply the acknowledgement that love could survive even in a place designed to erase it. "Now," Tom continued, moving to the workbench, "let's talk about wood. Every piece has its own character, its own strengths and weaknesses. The key to good carpentry is learning to work with the wood's natural properties rather than fighting against them." As he began the practical demonstration, Tom couldn't help but think that the same principle might apply to working with the boys themselves. Rather than trying to force them into predetermined molds, perhaps the key was finding ways to build on their existing strengths and natural abilities. Over the next few days, Tom established routines that would define his life at Carlisle. Taught his carpentry classes with patience and skill, gradually winning the respect of students who had grown suspicious of all adult authority. He attended staff meetings where he learned about the school's methods and philosophies, keeping his own opinions carefully to himself. And most importantly, he spent every permitted moment with Hope during the designated visiting hours. These visits were precious but heartbreaking. Hope would run to him with desperate joy, clinging to him as if afraid he might disappear again. He could see the confusion in her eyes, the way she was struggling to understand why their life together had been disrupted so completely. "Dada, when are we going home?" she would ask during each visit, and Tom would hold her close and promise that they would always be together, even if home looked different now. Mrs. Fletcher, the dormitory matron, watched these reunions with a mixture of sympathy and professional disapproval. She was not an unkind woman. She believed in the school's mission and worried that Tom's continued presence would make Hope's adjustment more difficult. "The child needs to learn independence," she told Tom after one particularly emotional parting. "Your visits upset her routine and make her resistant to forming bonds with her caretakers here." Tom understood the woman's concerns, but he also knew that Hope's bond with him was not something to be broken lightly. "She's only 3 years old, Mrs. Fletcher. She needs to know that she's still loved and wanted." "Of course she's loved," Mrs. Fletcher replied. "We care for all our children here. But we also need to prepare them for life in the modern world, and that sometimes means making difficult transitions." As the weeks passed, Tom began to see both the benefits and the costs of the Carlisle system. Hope was learning English more rapidly, interacting with other children, and developing new skills and knowledge. But she was also losing some of the spontaneous joy that had characterized her personality in their mountain home. She was becoming more compliant, more careful about expressing her emotions, more aware of the rules and expectations that governed every aspect of life at the school. Tom also began to understand the complex dynamics among the students. Many of them were deeply homesick and resentful of their forced attendance, but they had learned to hide these feelings behind masks of compliance. Others had genuinely embraced the school's teachings and looked forward to careers in the white world that their education was preparing them for. Still others fell somewhere in between, adapting to their circumstances while maintaining private connections to their cultural identities. The boy who had asked about Hope on that first day was named Joseph, though he confided to Tom that his real name was standing bearer a name that would earn him punishment if overheard by the wrong staff member. Joseph had been at Carlisle for 4 years, arriving when he was 14 after being taken from his family on the Pine Ridge Reservation. "The little ones have it harder," Joseph told Tom one afternoon as they worked together on a cabinet project. "The older kids, we remember who we were before we came here. But the babies, ... they grow up thinking this is normal. They forget they ever had another life." Tom felt a chill at these words, thinking of Hope's bright spirit and wondering how much of her authentic self would survive the school's well-intentioned but culturally destructive methods. That evening, during his visit with Hope, Tom made a quiet decision. He would do everything in his power to help her succeed at Carlisle, while also ensuring that she never forgot who she was or where she came from. It would require careful balance and considerable courage, but Tom had already proven that there was nothing he wouldn't do for his daughter. "Hope," he said gently, as she played with a wooden doll he had carved for her, "do you remember the stories I used to tell you about your first daddy? The one who loved you so much that he made sure you would be safe?" Hope nodded, her dark eyes serious. "Running Bear," she said. "He was brave." "That's right. And do you remember what I told you about your people? About being Apache?" "They were warriors," Hope said proudly. "And they loved the mountains and the horses." Tom smiled, relieved that she still remembered. "That's right, little one. You come from 2 worlds, the Apache world and the world we're living in now. Both parts of you are important, and both parts of you are loved." As he tucked her into her dormitory bed that night, Tom made a silent promise to both Hope and to Running Bear, wherever he might be. He would help Hope navigate this new world while ensuring she never lost sight of the heritage that made her unique. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever was. The real test of their bond was still to come. But Tom Harrison was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. His daughter's future depended on it. Winter at Carlisle brought a harsh routine that tested everyone's endurance. The dormitories were cold despite the coal furnaces. The food was plain and often insufficient. And the military discipline grew even more rigid as the students spent more time indoors. For Hope, now 4 years old, this was her first winter. Away from the cozy mountain cabin where Tom had read to her by the fireplace and taught her to carve simple shapes from pine wood. Tom watched his daughter adapt to the institutional life with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. She was learning to march in formation with the other small children, to respond to bugle calls that marked every transition in the daily schedule, and to speak only when spoken to during meals. Her natural curiosity was being channeled into approved educational activities. Her spontaneous laughter was becoming increasingly rare. But Tom also saw signs of resilience that gave him hope. Hope had made friends with other children in her dormitory, particularly a 5-year-old Lakota girl named Sarah, whose English name had replaced her birth name of Winona. The 2 girls would sit together during meals and hold hands during the mandatory evening prayers, providing each other with the comfort that the adult staff seemed unable or unwilling to offer. Tom's own position at the school had evolved over the months. His carpentry classes had become some of the most popular in the industrial program. partly because of his patient teaching style, but mostly because the students sensed that he respected them as individuals rather than seeing them merely as problems to be solved. Word had spread among the older boys that Mr. Harrison's daughter was one of the younger students, and this connection seemed to make him more trustworthy in their eyes. "Mr. Harrison," Joseph said one afternoon as they worked on repairing damaged furniture, "some of us have been talking. We want to help you watch out for Hope." Tom looked up from the table leg he was sanding. "What do you mean?" "The little ones, they need protecting sometimes," Joseph explained, his voice dropping to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "There are staff members who, they're not always kind to the children, who remind them too much of what we used to be." Hope still has that look in her eyes, like she remembers being free. Tom felt a familiar surge of protective anger, but he forced himself to remain calm. "What kind of protecting are you talking about?" Joseph glanced around the workshop to make sure they were alone, making sure she eats enough at meals, helping her with her English lessons so she doesn't get punished for not understanding, teaching her which staff members to avoid and which ones might show kindness. Small things, but they matter. Tom was moved by this offer of protection from boys who had little power themselves within the school's hierarchy.
Why would you do
"This, because she's your daughter," Joseph said simply. "And because you treat us like we're still human beings instead of projects to be fixed." This conversation led Tom to understand something important about survival at Carlisle. The students had developed their own unofficial networks of support and protection, ways of helping each other that existed outside the school's official structure. Hope was being quietly included in this network, which would help her navigate challenges that Tom couldn't always protect her from. Meanwhile, Tom was developing his own understanding of how to work within the system while maintaining his values. He had learned to phrase his concerns in ways that aligned with the school's stated goals, focusing on Hope's educational progress rather than her emotional well-being when speaking with administrators. He had also begun to identify staff members who shared his more humane approach to working with the children. One such ally was Miss Sarah Campbell, a young teacher from Boston who had come to Carlisle with idealistic notions about helping Savage children but was beginning to question some of the school's harsher methods. She taught the youngest children, including Hope, and had noticed the little girl's obvious intelligence and emotional sensitivity. "Hope is one of my most promising students," Miss Campbell told Tom during one of their carefully arranged conversations. "She learns quickly and helps the other children with their lessons, but I'm concerned about how quiet she's become. When she first arrived, she was much more expressive." Tom appreciated Miss Campbell's observation because it confirmed his own fears. "She's always been a thoughtful child, but you're right, she used to laugh more." "I've been thinking," Miss Campbell said, glancing around to ensure they weren't being observed. "Perhaps there are ways to encourage the children's natural personalities while still meeting the school's educational requirements. Small things that might help them maintain some sense of who they are." This conversation marked the beginning of a careful collaboration between Tom and Miss Campbell. She began incorporating more creative activities into her lessons, encouraging the children to tell stories and express themselves through art and music. Tom, meanwhile, used his carpentry classes to teach not just technical skills, but also problem-solving and creative thinking that went beyond the school's rigid curriculum. One of their most successful innovations was a project where Tom's older students built toys and learning materials for Miss Campbell's younger children. This gave the older boys a sense of purpose and connection to the younger ones, while providing Hope and her classmates with more engaging educational tools. It was a small act of rebellion disguised as educational cooperation. During one of these collaborative sessions, Tom was able to spend more time observing Hope in her school environment. He watched her help a younger Navajo boy with his alphabet blocks, her patience and kindness evident even within the constraints of the structured classroom. He saw her navigate the social dynamics among her peers with intelligence beyond her years, mediating small conflicts and including children who seemed lonely or left out. But he also noticed the careful way she watched the adults. It's always alert for signs of approval or disapproval, always ready to modify her behavior to avoid punishment. It was a survival skill that all the children developed at Carlisle. But seeing it in his 4-year-old daughter broke Tom's heart. She's learning to be two different people, Tom confided to Miss Campbell after one of these observation sessions. The person she thinks the school wants her to be, and the person she really is inside. Miss Campbell nodded sadly. I see it in all of them, but it's particularly heartbreaking in the youngest ones. They shouldn't have to learn such careful self-control at this age. The winter deepened, and with it came increased challenges for all the students. Several children became seriously ill with influenza, and the dormitories were placed under quarantine. Restrictions that made Tom's visits with Hope even more limited. During this difficult period, Tom learned more about the informal support networks among the students. Joseph and several other older boys took special care to ensure that Hope and the other small children in quarantine received extra food and attention. They would slip additional blankets into the dormitories, share medicine they had saved from their own illnesses, and even risk punishment by singing traditional lullabies. Softly enough that the staff wouldn't hear, but the homesick children would be comforted. When Hope herself came down with a fever that lasted for several days, Tom was nearly frantic with worry. The school's medical facilities were adequate but impersonal. He was allowed only brief, supervised visits to check on her condition. During one of these visits, he found Joseph sitting beside Hope's bed in the infirmary, quietly telling her a story in his native Lakota language. Mr. Harrison, Joseph said, standing quickly when Tom entered. I was just keeping her company. Tom looked at his daughter, flushed with fever, but listening intently to Joseph's gentle words, and felt a surge of gratitude for this young man who was risking punishment to provide comfort to a sick child. Thank you, Tom said quietly. What story were you telling her? Joseph hesitated, then decided to trust Tom with the truth. A story my grandmother told me about a little girl who was lost, but found her way home by following the stars. I thought, I thought it might help her feel less scared. Tom sat down on the other side of Hope's bed, taking her small hand in his large one. Would you tell it to me too? In English, so I can understand? For the next hour, Joseph retold the traditional story, weaving together themes of courage, wisdom, and the importance of remembering one's origins, even when far from home. Hope listened with bright, interested eyes despite her fever. And Tom found himself learning not just about Lakota culture, but about the ways that stories could preserve identity and provide comfort across cultural boundaries. When Hope recovered from her illness, she had gained something valuable from the experience. She had learned that there were people beyond her father who cared about her welfare, and she had been exposed to stories and ideas that connected her to the broader Native American experience represented by her. Students thought this network of care and cultural preservation would become increasingly important as Hope grew older and faced more complex challenges at Carlisle. But for now, Tom was simply grateful that his daughter was healthy and that she was learning to find family and support in unexpected places. As winter began to give way to spring, Tom reflected on the changes that the past months had brought to both their lives. Hope was becoming more self-reliant and sophisticated in her understanding of the complex world she inhabited. Tom was learning to be an advocate and protector in ways that went beyond his original role as her father. They were both adapting to circumstances they had never chosen, but they were doing so without losing sight of what mattered most: their love for each other and their commitment to Hope's future. The journey was far from over, but they were finding ways to honor both her Apache heritage and her need to succeed in the dominant culture that surrounded them. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Tom carefully presenting his concerns while Captain Pratt defended the school's approach. In the end, they reached a compromise that satisfied neither of them completely, but offered some hope. For Hope's continued development, Tom would be allowed to spend additional time with Hope, officially designated as cultural education sessions, where he could share stories and information about her heritage. These sessions would be supervised, would focus on historical and educational content rather than promoting any romanticized view of Native American life. In exchange, Tom would publicly support the school's mission and even assist with presentations to visiting dignitaries who wanted to see examples of successful cultural transformation. It was an imperfect solution, but it gave Tom hope that he could help Hope understand her complete identity without jeopardizing her future at the school. The first of these special sessions took place the following week in Miss Campbell's classroom, with the young teacher serving as the required supervisor. Tom had prepared carefully, bringing maps, photographs, and books that would help Hope understand her Apache heritage in historical and educational terms, rather than purely personal ones. "Hope," Tom began, spreading a map of Arizona on the desk. "Between them, I want to tell you about the land where you were born, and about the people you come from." Hope looked uncertain, glancing at Miss Campbell for approval before focusing on the map. "Is this for school?" "It's for you," Tom said. Gently. "It's part of your education, but it's also part of your story. Every person should know where they come from." Over the next hour, Tom told Hope about Apache history, culture, and traditions, carefully framing everything in terms that would satisfy the school's requirements while still conveying the richness and complexity of her heritage. He talked about Apache contributions to American history, about their skills as horsemen, and their knowledge of the desert environment. He showed her photographs of Apache leaders and explained their importance in the broader context of American development. Hope listened with growing interest, asking intelligent questions and making connections between what she was learning and her own experiences. For the first time in months, Tom saw flashes of the curious, engaged child she had been during their mountain years. The Apache people were skilled at adapting to difficult environments, Tom explained. They learned to find water in the desert, to read weather patterns, to survive in places where other people couldn't. That ability to adapt and survive, that's part of who you are, Hope nodded thoughtfully. Like how I learned to adapt to Carlisle. Tom felt his heart clench at the insight in her question. It's exactly like that. You have the strength of both worlds, the Apache ability to adapt and survive, and the education and opportunities that Carlisle is giving you. That combination makes you special. As the weeks passed, these sessions became the highlight of both Tom's and Hope's weeks. Hope began to carry herself with more confidence, and some of her natural curiosity and expressiveness returned. She was still succeeding academically and socially at Carlisle, but she was doing so from a place of greater self-knowledge and pride. The change didn't go unnoticed by other students, particularly Joseph and the other older boys who had been part of Hope's informal support network. They saw that she was finding ways to honor her heritage while still succeeding within the school system. And several of them began asking Tom for similar guidance about their own backgrounds. This led to Tom's next innovation, informal evening sessions where he would work with interested older students on carpentry projects while sharing stories and information about various Native American cultures. These sessions were technically focused on vocational training, but they also provided opportunities for cultural exchange and identity exploration that were otherwise forbidden at the school. Mr. Harrison Joseph said during one of these sessions, "You're teaching us something the school doesn't want us to learn, that we can be successful in the white world without completely forgetting who we used to be." Tom looked around the workshop at the faces of these young men who were struggling to maintain their sense of self, while preparing for lives in a world that often seemed hostile to their very existence. That's exactly what I'm trying to teach. You don't have to choose between success and identity. You can have both, but it takes courage and wisdom to figure out how. As Hope's 8th birthday approached, Tom reflected on how much both of their lives had changed since that day at the trading post, when a desperate father had made an impossible choice. Hope was growing into a remarkable young woman who was learning to navigate complex questions of identity and belonging. Tom had evolved from a silent lumberjack into an educator and advocate who was finding ways to work within an imperfect system while maintaining his values. The challenges ahead would only grow more complex as Hope entered her teenage years and had to make increasingly independent decisions about who she wanted to become. But Tom was confident that the foundation they were building together one that honored all parts of her story while preparing her for success in whatever future she chose would serve her. Well, in the years to come, the price of growing up at Carlisle was high. Tom was determined that Hope would pay it without losing the essential parts of herself that made her unique. It was a delicate balance, but one that seemed increasingly possible, as Hope learned to take pride in all aspects of her heritage. Hope's 15th birthday arrived on a crisp October morning in 1902, marking not just another year of life, but a crucial milestone in her journey toward adulthood. She had grown into a poised, intelligent young woman who carried herself with quiet confidence. Her Apache features now matured into genuine beauty that drew respectful attention from both students and staff at Carlisle. But more importantly, she had learned to navigate the complex demands of living between two worlds without sacrificing her integrity or her sense of self. Tom watched his daughter during the small birthday celebration that Miss Campbell had organized. In the classroom, noting how naturally she moved between conversations with her classmates and interactions with the supervising adults, Hope had become something that Carlisle's founders had never intended to create. A young woman who was fully prepared to succeed in white society while maintaining deep pride in her Native American heritage. "She's remarkable," Miss Campbell whispered to Tom as they watched Hope help a younger student with a difficult arithmetic problem. "In all my years here, I've never